Mindful Living podcast, where we explore transformative stories of resilience, growth, and healing. I'm your host, Sana, and today's episode is both heart wrenching and deeply inspiring. Well, we are joined by AJ Otjen, a 2023 Library of Congress Award winning author and also we'll be talking about Montana firefighter Dan Steffensen, whose survival story in the face of an unimaginable wildfire has been captured in the powerful new book Burn Over. Now, together, this book shares a raw, honest look into the world of wildland firefighting, the physical and emotional toll of burn recovery, and how community and courage can be the very things that pull us through our darkest hours. So grab a quick cup of beverage, settle in, and prepare to be moved, listeners. So, AJ, welcome to the show, and it's such an honor having you with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay. So AJ, let's start with revisiting back to that day. I know it can be really difficult, but I think this is the strongest way of expressing pain, and it's kind of uplifting as well. So, if you can take us back to that day, what exactly was the most vivid memory about that moment that changed everything for Dan?
Uh, well, it started with a very simple fire. Dan is a senior firefighter with the Red Lodge Fire Rescue. Red Lodge is a town just at the edge of Yellowstone Park. Most people in the world have heard of Yellowstone National Park, and right on the northern edge is a town called Red Lodge, Montana. And he's a senior firefighter there. And they were called out to a very small grass fire north of the town, and he was putting that fire out, unaware that there was a very big storm about 60 miles away heading his way. And first, you need to understand that the National Weather Service is monitoring this storm, but their communication to the radio frequency that all the firefighters were on that day um, is takes about 20 minutes to alert people to the weather conditions. And since the storm was 60 miles away, they weren't really paying attention to firefighters in his area. And the other thing you need to know is there's something called a downdraft that can, you know, bring up winds 70 miles an hour in front of the storm. So so the storm did pick up a downdraft, and and this downdraft created a wind that made that little bitty fire that he was fighting become a wall of fire 60 feet high with a wind that was going 80 miles an hour. And there was no notice at all. And it came right at Dan. And he was out there with his hose trying to put out this small fire. And that wall of fire came right at him. And there was no running from it. He saw it coming and he tried to get back to the black. His partner was in the engine and he tried to get back to the black. The black is where it's already burned and it's called the safe zone. But that fire just burned right over him. And that was why, and it just, you know, just got him. And he didn't even know he was that badly injured. I mean, he sat there and held his breath while it burned over him. And then he tried to put out the fire of the engine because his friend was inside. Fortunately, his friend did not get burned, but he just got really hot. And then his friend came out to find him. He said, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Yeah, I think so." But he was taking off all of his gear because it was all hot, too hot to touch. And then the chief came running and his friend came running and they looked at him and his skin was flaking off of him. So he was pretty much in shock, not realizing that he was so badly burned. He had third-degree burns over 60% of his body. And he's such a tough guy. I mean, everybody says he's a tough guy. He says, "It's okay. I can keep fighting the fire." And no, he couldn't. And everybody on the radio, when they said, "Well, we're burned over, we have to, stop the fight," um, they was the panicked voices were getting more and more panicked over the radio, and here came an ambulance, and the wind was so bad they couldn't get a helicopter in there, and they had to get him to the hospital, and immediately they said, "Well, we're flying you to Utah." They put him out, and they flew him to Utah, which is Utah is the place where the best burn center in the country is, and he ended up being in a coma for weeks because he was so badly burned, yeah, so
Oh,
when the EMT got there, and see, they all know each other. They're all it's like a one big family of firefighters. The EMT got there and he recognized it was Dan, and she said one thing, "Load and go." They didn't stop to do anything. They just put him in the ambulance and tried to get to the hospital as quickly as possible. And the whole time he was saying, "I'm fine. I'm fine." Because the fire burns away their nerves so they don't feel any pain. And, uh, and she was afraid he was gonna die right there in the ambulance. And when they got to the emergency room, everybody in the emergency room thought that they were looking at a man who was gonna die right in front of them. So and then when he got to Utah, there's something called the Honor Guard in Utah they're dressed covered to shiny shoes, and they normally greet, burn victims, um, when they come off the airplane, and they stand over them until they die. But Dan never died. He was in a coma, but he didn't die, and, so he ended up being a burn survivor, and that pretty much was the story. The town of Red Lodge needed him to come home because they were having a horrific summer of a lot of tragedies, and they needed Dan to live and come home. So
yeah. I mean, I can. First of all, thank you so much, AJ, for sharing the story, and um, I can feel the intensity just hearing i- you describing it. Uh, but it's one thing to read about fire or hear about, but it's another to live through it or maybe hear from someone who has lived through it. And some of the most striking parts of that story is in those moments when Dan was affected by the fire, he still worried about his friend colleague who was there inside the vehicle. um, and
yes.
he kept on saying that I'm fine, I'm fine. uh, that that is definitely um, the extreme kind of courage and strength a human can exhibit. So this is not a small thing. So thank you so much, AJ, for sharing it. Thank you so much. And hats off to Dan. Hats off to him. So now let's talk about the recovery part. So of course, burn injuries, they don't just affect the body, they impact mind and spirit. So what
Yes.
helped Dan navigate the emotional aftermath of such trauma, AJ?
Well, you kinda have to go back to before the burn, and I do spend a lot of time with who the man is.
Mhm.
First, a woman in his life had died the year before the burn. So he was already kind of a grumpy old man, which is a symptom that all firefighters face when they're not fighting fires. When they're sitting around the firehouse waiting, not fighting fires, they're very grumpy. And so there was a lot going on in Red Lodge that that there, first of all, there was a great big fire that came
Mhm.
right to the edge of town, and they were fighting that, and then had they had 2 other fires going on, so there was and then there was a lost, Montana State graduate that was she was an excellent hiker, but the Beartooth Mountains are very big, very dense, and she went hiking, and then so search and rescue, which is still part of the same firehouse, they were out all summer looking for her. And then another firefighter, very talented, athlete, snowboarder. He was out skateboarding, but fell and hit his head on the pavement and ended up being on life support. So all this was going on back in Red Lodge. Well, and that's why they needed Dan to survive and come home, because the town was just facing such, horrific tragedy all summer long. All this happened within a 60-day period of time. So knowing that this was going on, you know, and then another firefighter ended up being diagnosed with brain cancer. So he woke up from his coma and realized that he was a 65-year-old man in horrific pain. And here were two young firefighters who, one had died and another one was dying, and they had, young kids. And he said, why am I in living? God, what are you thinking? And he really had a difficult time wondering why he was still alive, to the point where he wanted to die. There's a whole chapter about, let me die, God. I hurt so bad. This wound care, which is just awful, and we describe it in the book, in the PT. And I want to die. You should have taken me. Why are you taking these young men? And and this is not right. And the only reason he kept going was because of his family. He did not want to see his kids, have despair. And ends up that's why a lot of burn survivors keep going, is because they just don't want to see the despair of their families. They don't want their families to hurt. So they'll say, okay, I'll get up one more day and keep going. Because otherwise they would just as soon give up. It's just so awful to recover from burns. Uh, and um, and the other thing is, he finally realized that the town needed him to come home. So that's the other reason he kept going. But he really couldn't accept that he had this new life ahead of him with all of this maintenance of skin and skin grafts, until he saw the other burn survivors. And they have a saying: between the past and the future is acceptance. You have to come to accept your new life. And he couldn't do that. He didn't want to live with all this new effort. Living with scars and skin grafts for the rest of your life is a real ordeal. And he didn't want to accept that he couldn't get back to where he was as a very strong and tough firefighter. And but then he looked at other burn survivors, and many of them are amputees, and they were doing very well. They had accepted their new life and how they were going to function. And he said, well, heck, I guess if they can do it, then I can do it. So he finally got back to work and started not complaining about wound care and PT, but started saying, okay, where's wound care? Where is PT? I got to get to work. I got to get back to being a firefighter. And ends up that he did. And within 2 years, he was back on the fire line. He had passed something called a pack test, which is 3 miles in 45 minutes carrying 45 pounds. Of course, he did it when he still had some skin grafts to go. So he's basically a crazy guy as well. So he got back to the fire line because he's just so tough. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That is
But he had to overcome the psychological, problems, wanting to die, did not accepting what was happening, not wanting to ask for help. I think the hardest part is asking for help. People just don't like to ask for help, and he's the worst at that. He is the absolute worst at asking for help. Yeah. So
I can that. And this also shows that healing is not linear. It definitely has ebbs and flows. And as you very beautifully said, the hardest part is asking for help. And it does take a lot of time, self-acceptance, self-compassion to
Mhm.
seek for help and get better psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually as well.
Yes, and he was pretty much estranged from his family when this had happened. Uh,
Okay.
and yet he had two children that were grown, and the daughters of Marnie, who had died, were grown, and his brother was across on the other side of the country. But they all met in Utah. and got back together and said, well, we're going to get together to save Dan. And so when he woke up, they were all there. And they came back together as a family for one purpose, to save Dan. And that was, so this is a story of his family and the community of Red Lodge all pulling together for this one man. And understand that Red Lodge, because they're surrounded by fuel, which is forest and grass, they're a town of first responders. They're if you're not part of the fire department, you're a family of the fire department. And first responders do not like to sit around and worry about people. They'd much rather be caring for people. Dan was going crazy in Utah. He's not a guy who can sit still, and he was supposed to be there for 6 months. Well, he ended up being there for about 2 months because the town of Red Lodge said, "Bring him home, we'll take care of him." So they did. I mean, his brother moved in with him to continue with the wound care, the debriding, the PT, and then and there were other people in town who could continue with the PT. The town fed him. They picked him up and took him to the doctor. So there was and made the town be able to care for him instead of worry about him. So because of the town and his family, he was able to go home and continue with his care.
Speaks that. Says, but I love here how there are so many elements here. There is the individual spirit, the inner fight within Dan during his healing journey, and then accepting that yes, I need to get back to my my life of firefighting. I need to get back to my original self, and then there is his family, and then there is the entire town of Red Lodge coming to Dan to help him through his journey. So there are so many elements beautifully playing here: the role of self, individualism, the role of family, the role of community. So that's
Yes.
beautiful. That's just beautiful. And AJ, what drew you to Dan's story? I mean, how did you ensure the book reflected not just facts, but the emotional truth of his journey? Because it must have been really, very interesting for you.
That's a very good question. Because I'm an academic, and I normally write academic articles. And I met Dan with my students were doing a promotion for the firefighters calendar that was raising money for personal protective equipment. And Dan was wearing this personal protective equipment when he was burned over, or it saved his life. So he ended up being sort of the star of the campaign. He said, please, help us raise funds so that all firefighters can have this equipment and everyone has a chance to survive. And so I met him on that shoot, and I had written a couple of children's books with my crow. That's Salika Crow. That's one of the Indian tribes here in Montana. They had stories to tell, and I helped my students get their stories on paper, basically. And then one of the children's books was recently done and accepted by the Library of Congress. And he read that book and he said, "Would you write my book?" And I said, "Well, Dan, I'm really good at, my specialty is, 1,000 words. I've never done a nonfiction novel before, but he says, well, I think you can do it." And I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." So 2.5 years later, of facts, as you said, like I said, I'm an academic. I do a lot of research. So I started off by researching fire and weather and all those important elements in the book. But I also live in Montana, so I know what fire season's like, and I understood that drama. And then I got to interviewing all the people involved, but it still needed, there still was a story to be told, a narrative story that I needed to up my skills and become a narrative writer. And it was the 2.5 years that it took to write the story was very emotional, and it was emotional for Dan as well because he does not like to share his feelings, and so I needed to really get in there and get Dan to tell me what it was like for him, and it was, there had to be a relationship of trust for him to open up and really confide in me what was going on with him, from losing Marnie to getting, to having his kids come back and, you know, be with him again, to, not realizing how much the town cared about him, to what it was like to talk to God when he was down there, to wanting to die, to then accepting that he wasn't going to die, so he better get to work, and then what his life is like now. All of that was, all very personal for him, that was very difficult for him to share, but it was an important part of the story, but it was also very important to talk to the people in, Red Lodge about what they were going through, how hard it was for them, to talk to the doctors and the nurses, the honor guard who was standing over him, uh, and they could not put into words their emotions. So I had to find the words for them and try to get that on the page, to get the love on the page, to get the emotions on the page was something that I had to step up my skills to figure out how to do it. And it was a daunting, you know, process for me, but, I knew it was important to do. And so I really did it. I tried my best to get it right. I thought it was important to get it right. So many people were wanting this story told, and they wanted it told, so I I got it done. Yeah.
And it really feels like a sacred act of witnessing. And then, I really resonate, AJ, with how you chose to amplify Dan's voice while also creating a narrative that others could connect with. And for that, I mean, 2 years, um, really, I mean, it's really, really inspiring, really inspiring. And let's also talk about the bigger message here. So, at its core, AJ, Burned Over is about survival, but I what I realize through this conversation, it's also about transformation. It's about the role of community. It's about connecting with God, maybe with your higher self. It's about that inner fight within. So, what do you hope readers walk away with after reading this book?
Uh, you know, so many people have told me um, that that they couldn't put it down, first of all, that they had to stop to cry every once in a while because it's an emotional book. But burn survivors have gotten a lot of, inspiration out of it. They think it's a very important burn book. I've had people tell me that now every time they see a fire engine go by, they have a complete, a whole new appreciation for firefighters. I think that's important. Um, uh, and the people that I wrote about, that they have said that are they're very happy that that summer was memorialized. It was important to them that this book was memorialized. And also, what Dan's goal was to thank all the people that saved him. It was a Herculean effort by 1,000 people, from the workman's comp people to the doctors and nurses to the community to his family. You know, these good people stepped up to greatness, and they don't get recognized nearly enough for all the people they save. So just telling Dan's story, I think, helps recognize all the people who do this kind of thing every day. If we can somehow shine a light on these heroes that save people like Dan every day and what they go through, then I think we've accomplished what we wanted to accomplish.
Beautifully said, AJ. I really love this because survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about deciding how to live after everything changes. And that to me is at the heart of mindful living. So thank you so much for uh, giving me this opportunity to host you, AJ, and get the story of Dan, you know, globally to all the people out there, um, and sharing the miraculous efforts, the love, the warmth of family, community, of rediscovering our own self. So if our listeners would like to get a hold of your book, how they can do that?
It's available worldwide on Amazon in Kindle and Audible and in print form. It's on Amazon.com. It's called Burned Over: The Survival of Montana Firefighter Dan Steffensen.
Great. And thank you so much, AG, once again for this conversation. Thank you. I couldn't thank you more, and I couldn't thank Dad, his family, and the town of Red Lodge, and to all the first responders out there.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
And listeners, this conversation is a powerful reminder that healing is messy, courageous, and deeply human. Dan's story in Burned Over offers hope not just for those who fight fires, but for anyone walking through their own flames. And if you are moved by today's episode, pick up the book, share it with someone who needs it, and remember, in your own healing journey, you are never, never alone. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you.